Dead on Your Feet, Arthur Grant Michaels, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1993. Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 3, narrator Eric Aust. In memory of Tajana and Andre, with gratitude and respect and love, thanks to the patience and generosity of my friends. Chapter 4. Singing in the Rain. Next morning, the telephone blasted me out of a fitful sleep like a panic alert for a nuclear attack. Its tormented electronic bleating launched a dull, unfocused pressure at the back of my skull. With a queasy stomach, all I could recall was the vast quantity and variety of alcohol and food that I had consumed just a few hours earlier. Groggily, I hoped the phone call would be Rafik, eager to apologize for his role in the horrible misunderstanding we'd had last night. At numerous points during the night, I'd awakened, startled and anxious and tense. I'd get as far as punching his number, but then logic would take over and I'd hang up before the call went through. After all, what if he wasn't home? That would be even worse than the torture of regret. So, throughout the long, lonely night, I tried to assure myself that we'd soon be frantically apologizing and forgiving each other, and everything would be back to normal. The phone was still ringing. I grabbed clumsily and dropped it, accidentally bumping Sugar Baby, who at some point during the night had deigned to settle on the empty pillow next to mine. Rafik's place. From her cat sleep, she sprang from the pillow, leaped over my head, landed on the Turkish carpet that covers my bedroom floor, and scampered away. I put the phone to my ear, but before I'd even said hello, I heard Rafik speaking excitedly with his heavy French accent. "Stenny," he said, "there is great trouble. Max Harkey is dead." My first reaction was that Rafik was playing a prank to distract me and win back my affection. If so, it was one unworthy of his fertile imagination. Then again, perhaps it was that cultural difference between us that made his joke sound flat to me. Some francophone subtlety I still couldn't appreciate. But I wondered, and Max Hartley? Be damned! What about us? Aren't you sorry about last night? Have you forgotten how you hurt me? "Stenny?" he said, uncertain, as though the phone might be out of order and the connection never properly made. "I'm here," I replied coolly, thinking to myself, "and so far you haven't said the words I want to hear." "Stenny, I find him like this is horrible." "Where are you?" "At his apartment." I set my blurry vision toward the alarm clock. There seemed to be only one hand pointing downward. It was 6:30. "What are you doing there at this hour?" The line was quiet. After a few seconds of waiting for his answer, I felt the throbbing at the back of my head move forward to my temple. Then an unexpected wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I envisioned every goddamn glass of alcohol I'd had last night. They all swirled in a vortex in my mind's eye. From the first martinis at my apartment to the additional cocktails at Max Harkey's, to the numerous glasses of wine with dinner, to the tumbler of liquor afterwards. It all came back with nauseating clarity. Oh, to be unconscious. All I wanted was to put the phone down and go back to sleep. Maybe then all of last night's mistakes, especially my boozy belligerence, would fade away back into a dream. Then I could wake up again later to a bright new world where everything was blue skies and songbirds. The ideal was so appealing that I almost nodded off. "Stenny," said Rafik. I returned to the present, to the unpleasantness of why Rafik was at Max Harkey's place at 6:30 in the morning. Somewhere I recalled Max Hartley saying that Rafik needed to be humbled. Had the challenge been met last night only to culminate in the man's death? I confronted Rafik directly. "Did you spend the night with him?" I said. "How could you ask such a thing?" he yelled. A tremor of pain rammed itself through my swollen brain. "Stenny, his blood is every place." The new tension in Rafik's voice told me that perhaps he wasn't kidding. I sat up in the bed. Sugar Baby must have sensed my alarm because she jumped back up onto the bed and nestled against my thigh. I rested my forehead against my free hand. Tell me what happened, Rafik. I tell you, he is dead. If he was telling the truth, there was only one thing to do. I'd been in those exact circumstances myself, facing a corpse. Back then, I thought I'd done the right thing by being responsible in calling the police, but then I always learned the hard way. Rafik, if Max Harkey is really dead, he is, Stanley, believe me. Then you must do exactly what I say. But Stanley! No buts, Rafik. Just listen and do. First, you wipe your fingerprints off everything you've touched in that place. Everything. Understand? And then you get out of there. Now. I'll be waiting for you here. I cannot do that, Stanley. Why not? The police are here, said the master of selective omission. They do not know I am calling you. They ask me many questions. Will you come, please? I paused, not quite sure what to do or say. My arrival at Max Harkey's place might only complicate things, especially with the police there. The line was quiet while I deliberated. When Rafik spoke again, I heard a new timbre in his voice, wily modulation, cryptic but musical, a kind of aural snare distilled from a legacy of Middle Eastern genes and the myriad ruses employed by clever harem boys to spare themselves painful punishment or even castration. Steady, he said. I am sorry for last night. I did not mean those things. His words flowed like dark notes from a wood flute, and their exotic coloration left me defenseless. I love you. I will stop my work. I will leave the ballet. After our falling out, I'd hoped for a more dramatic reconciliation. A physical event where Rafik would arrive at my threshold repentant and contrite. Even at 3 o'clock in the morning, he would beg forgiveness and let me show him just how much and how willingly I could forgive. But instead, Rafik was now inducing me to rescue him from a bad situation with the police at the home of the very man with whom he might have had the ultimate confrontation and who was now dead. Okay, Rafik, don't quit your job yet. I'm on my way. I hung up the phone and got out of bed. I turned on the shower, then decided that the situation precluded my usual morning ablutions. Instead, I rinsed my face with cold water, put on some clean clothes, and was ready to leave within minutes. As I opened the door, I noticed Sugar Baby's wide, bewildered eyes following me. Yes, doll, I said to her, I am going without feeding you. From my apartment to Max Harkey's penthouse is a brisk 15 to 20 minute walk. Finding a cab to take me there was going to take just as long, so I opted for Slavic locomotion. The sun hadn't come up yet, and the air outside was misty and gray. The pavement felt damp and cold. Through the leather soles of my old loafers, the last dregs of last night's success still coursed through my veins, altering my perceptions and my steady stride. I urged my legs to move faster, figuring the exercise might burn off the alcoholic poison and the gnawing doubt in my blood. Despite my muddled thinking, though, two facts were clear enough. Rafik needed me, and I wanted to help him, but this latest complication in the melodrama Life with Rafik was jangling my psyche. Before meeting him, I had narrowly connected sex with love. Coupling was almost a spiritual act for me, a shared experience of two souls, elevated and sacred, but Rafik brought expanded dimension to the notion of elevated. His sturdy rig and his 4 smooth-moving limbs sang with the same true and natural ease as a born musician uses perfect pitch. Except that Rafik's kind of body song relates more to the hunt than to poetry. When he slides his supple self through space, he stalks everything in his path, and when he connects with his prey, it's pure fulguration, like a magnesium ribbon that flares white-hot. Even after a year with Rafik, the sex is so satisfying and surprising that I can't imagine doing it with anyone else. But I still insist on being safe. It annoys Rafik, who trusts our blood test and who vows he is and always will be sexual only with me. But just as the ideal of monogamy is no proof of love, neither is unsafe sex. The condoms are a disputed point between us. The glamour and desirability of Max Harkey's address so glitteringly evident last night were now obscured by numerous police cruisers and a medical rescue van that had completely blocked the narrow pavement and sidewalk for the entire length of Appleton. Flashers whirled and noisy engines idled as if in readiness for imminent departure. Since Appleton Mews was a dead-end street, traffic wasn't a concern, and at that early hour, cars were even more unlikely. Still, a few police officers stood around ready to redirect anyone attempting to drive down the quiet street. At the far end of the Mews was the Appleton itself, usually refined and stately, now cordoned off by police markers. The gaudy neon ropes made the building look somewhat like a grand dam in disgrace. Parked in front of the Appleton was a car that I recognized immediately. An old Alfa Romeo coupe with the designation Giulia Sprint Veloce. I knew the classic sports car belonged to Detective Lieutenant Vito Branco of the Boston Police Department. Branco must have got a recent raise because the Alfa's dark green paint had been expertly reconditioned. Also parked out front was Big Red, in exactly the same place it had been last night. Had Rafik spent the night? The motorcycle caused neither tingles nor tears at that moment. I approached the Appleton's main entrance, where 3 more police officers were guarding the doorway under the great marble arch. I explained to them that I had a friend in the building and that I wanted permission to enter. I didn't exactly grovel, but past experience has taught me that politeness doesn't hurt when courting the police. One cop checked my identification and agreed to escort me up to Max Harkey's apartment. We went inside and entered the small wood-paneled elevator. As we ascended, the cop and I remained awkwardly silent, but we studied each other furtively. He looked like a walking display for all the accoutrements of authority. Gun in holster, blackjack, handcuffs, squawk box, lug-soled boots, wide leather belt with heavy chrome buckle. Though he held his face in a tense scowl, his eyes kept shifting toward me, then darting quickly away as if he was studying the panel of oiled marble in front of him. But I knew he was sizing me up, and for all my reasonable masculinity, I might as well have been hauling a sandwich board that read, "Gay man inside." That's probably what was unnerving the poor guy. But then, my sexuality seems to unhinge only the most fervently macho men. The elevator door slid open onto the small vestibule, and that connected directly to Max Harkey's apartment. A funeral gray light caused me to look up, and I saw that the ceiling was skylit, which I hadn't noticed last night. The security door to the main foyer of the penthouse was wide open, and the cop led me in. In this very place last night had transpired a social gathering, the rules of which I hadn't quite grasped, but nonetheless had managed to violate this morning. The cops were using their own set of peculiar rules, the ones that create pandemonium of any situation. When I entered the sprawling penthouse, the first thing I saw was Max Harkey, slumped at his big grand piano. He appeared almost to be playing the instrument, expressing himself in a deep and moving passage. His head lowered to the keys as if to coax the instrument's very soul to speak. Except that Max Harkey was dead. The Persian carpet at his feet was saturated with a huge dark stain, which I knew was blood. Then appeared the brawny form of Detective Lieutenant Vito Branco. He didn't notice me as he approached. Max Harkey's body had crouched down to examine it closely. His back was to me, and he blocked my view of the dead man. But I caught a microsecond glimpse of a huge, glistening wound, still red and alive, around Max Harkey's groin. From where I stood, it looked as though he had been castrated. I had to turn my head away and bite my lip hard, then take some deep breaths to quell the nausea. It wouldn't do to vomit here in front of the cops. In a few moments, the cold sweat subsided, and I could turn my attention back to the lobby. Lieutenant Branco was still intent on the corpse, with what appeared to be more than a clinical interest. Was he as disturbed by the wounds as I was? Though Branco was younger than Max Harkey, perhaps he recognized the similarities between them. The victim was a man about the same build as Branco, 6 feet plus. with the same broad shoulders and sturdy loins. He even had the same strong jaw and cheekbones, same sculpted nostrils and lips. From my meeting last night, I hadn't guessed that Max Harkey still possessed such a muscular body. Branco was now gazing at the victim's legs, blood-drenched and fully exposed by the gaping silk bathrobe that lay open below his waist. The limbs were obviously strong, yet elegant, almost regal. Oddly, I was saddened by the bloodiness. I wondered about Branco's powerful legs, how much bulkier his muscles probably were, and how his skin was most likely taut and hairy, not smooth like Max Harkey's. When the lieutenants changed position, I got a good look at Max Harkey's body. With great relief, I saw that everything in his crotch was still intact. So what had held Branco's attention? Had he been compelled by machismo to make a comparison? Was there cause for envy? The lieutenant quickly moved his gaze away from the lifeless organs, and I wondered if I'd imagined the entire vignette, especially since sex is always on my mind, stimulating, electrocuting my cerebral cortex to invent perversions where none exist. I moved closer to the piano, except for all the blood. Max Harkey's legs could have been sculpted from pale gray-blue marble. Then I saw the wound close up, one clean, deep puncture on the inner face of each thigh, directly into the femoral arteries. Max Harkey had been bled to death. Branco rose quickly and steadied himself on the nearby piano. He closed his eyes as if to recover from his examination. Was it just the sudden rise to his feet, or did Branco have a weakness? Did certain kinds of killings bother him more than others? Had anyone but me noticed his lingering interest of the dead man's legs? It wouldn't do to seem too interested in the exposed nakedness of an attractive male body, no matter how dead it was. With a scowl, Branco's forced his eyes open. And still he didn't see me, but I was getting reacquainted with all the dark, muscular features that this cop shared with my lover, and then the million subtleties that distinguished the two handsome men. Branco's face twisted into a frown, and he stifled a belch. He seemed to be having a rough morning. Branco spoke sharply to his sergeant. "Get him in the bag," the sergeant replied. "Med-X hasn't made his report yet, sir," Branco snapped. "Then just get the damn bag ready." The sergeant wilted slightly at Branco's order. Then he said, pointing to me, "What about him, Lieutenant?" Branco turned toward me and stared for a long, disbelieving moment before he said, "What are you doing here?" "My friend called me." "You tangled up in this?" "No, but," Branco barked into the question to his sergeant, "where are the witnesses?" "Witnesses? Who else was present? And where was Rafik?" The sergeant answered Branco by jerking his head sharply toward the kitchen. Branco turned away from me and with a heavy tread went toward the swinging door that led to the penthouse kitchen. He paused at the swinging door and turned back to us. He pointed to me and said to his sergeant, "Hold him downstairs." Then he pushed the door open. A blaze of morning sun should have burst from the kitchen, but instead the drab monochrome of a drizzly March morning seeped out. In spite of Branco's order to eject me from the premises, I asked the sergeant if I could see Rafik. The sergeant looked through me and said, "You heard the man." There was no sense in resisting the inevitable, so I let myself be led out from Max Harkey's apartment and back downstairs to be held outside at Branco's leisure. On my way out the front door, I noticed that the latch had been jimmied. The officers out there eyed me with suspicion, hoping perhaps that I might do something that would galvanize them to action, to behave like cops. I went and stood near Big Red as if the motorcycle and I might comfort each other while waiting for Branco. Fine droplets had condensed from the misty air onto the bike's lacquered metal parts and heavy chrome fittings. In the dim morning light, Big Red emitted a kind of sanctified glow that enveloped me with its protective aura. How many times had I held onto Rafik's body while riding behind him on that motorcycle, on those fantastic and romantic trips to nowhere? Big Red was like family. Suddenly the cop's radio squawked loudly and jolted the three of them to alertness. The faggot and the motorcycle were small potatoes now that they'd got a call from the boss upstairs. A few minutes later, 2 officers came out from the building, and along with them came a big surprise. Between them, they were holding Tony Di Natale, who was handcuffed. Lieutenant Branco followed behind. Tony Di Natale looked confused and disheveled, as though she had been taken unawares. I noticed that she was wearing the same outfit she'd worn last night. She glanced toward me. Our eyes met. Then she lowered her head guiltily. I wondered why. Had she killed Max Harkey? Had she had sex with Rafik? Perhaps both. But that vision of her, the confident woman, now vulnerable and submissive to the brute force of 2 big men, well, it struck a chord to me, and I found myself feeling sorry for her. The cops jammed the young woman into the back seat of a cruiser and drove off. Branco approached me where I was standing near Big Red. "This your bike?" he said with an approving look. "My lover's," went the cop. I said, "I'd like to know how he is." Branco replied, "You want to tell me what you're doing here?" "Rafik called me." Branco clenched his jaw muscles and compressed his lips, obliterating their sensuous fullness. His brow wrinkled. "So you're an accessory?" "I create beauty, Lieutenant. I am not an accessory." Branco pulled the corners of his mouth back into the hint of a smile, though his eyes maintained their steely blue-gray hardness. "Still the smart-ass, huh, Kraychik?" "Whenever provoked, Lieutenant." Then a strange thing happened. The lieutenant's face softened somewhat, and he looked directly into my eyes as though, for a moment, he wanted to portray a person and not a cop. "How are you and your friend getting along?" he said. I stalled. What did Branco care about my personal life? He was a straight cop, and I was a gay hairdresser. Why did it matter in his realm of the moral majority how I was muddling through my life, or was he just looking for evidence? "Could be better," I said, but I immediately regretted my candid reply. "How's your life?" I asked, trying to make buddy banter. Branco didn't reply, but instead jerked his head up and pushed his jaw forward. "I'll find you later," he said. Then he got into the Alpha Coup and drove off. Shortly after that exchange came yet another surprise. Out the front door to the Appleton, completely unescorted, strolled Marshal Xander. "I thought I saw you upstairs," he said. "What brings you here?" "I could ask the same of you," I answered. He smiled comfortably. "You could," he said. "The difference is that I'll tell you. Max called me this morning. Apparently someone had broken in and attacked him. He sounded pretty bad, so I called the police and came straight over myself." "Didn't he call the police himself?" "I don't know," said Marshal Xander. "Max needed help, and he needed it fast. I didn't ask questions. I took action." "Did Max tell you who attacked him?" "He was already gone when I got here." "I mean, when he phoned you, did he give you any clue who had done it?" "No," he said. "I told you, he sounded awful scared. I didn't think to ask him anything, only to get here as fast as I could. Now I wish I had. We'd probably have his killer now." I noticed then that Marshal Xander's brown eyes were filling with tears. His composure was dissolving fast. I'd seen it happen before, the way some people can maintain a facade of strength in the face of horror and even for a long while afterward, and then lose it all at once as soon as their audience was departed, which in this case was the police. His chin quivered while he spoke. "You know who else was up there?" I shook my head no. "Of course you do," he said. "And I want to know what they were doing. Don't you wonder what your lover and that woman were doing up there? They were already there when the police arrived, you know?" "That doesn't mean anything," I said coolly, but his words had set my imagination running wild with doubt. "Who did this to him?" demanded Marshal Xander. "Max! Max!" he wailed, and then broke down into a grotesque gasping sobs. Once again I saw why I had failed as a therapist. I couldn't tolerate the agony and the ugliness of anyone else's pain, real or imagined. I'd wanted to fix everything immediately at any cost, even if it meant taking the pain unto myself. And the attitude and behavior will destroy the helper fast. A good therapist needs a detached, clinical kind of compassion, but I was cursed with the tendency to sacrifice myself for others. The only way for me to survive was to quit the field altogether, to leave the analyst's couch to the expertise and work my miracles cures at the styling chair. I stood there, unmoved by Marshal Xander's breakdown. wishing with all my cold heart that he could stop his crying and go away. I didn't want to be involved with him or with Max Harkey's death. I didn't even want to be there. I only wanted to know that Rafik was all right, and so far I hadn't found that out. Where was he? After a few more moments of histrionic wailing, Marshal Xander quieted down. He panted in shallow, quick breaths like a blundering, slow-witted animal that has miraculously escaped its pursuer. But once he regained his composure, his eyes became dark and mean, and the next words he spoke were full of venom. If your lover had anything to do with this, so help me, I'll see him pay for it. But his threat rang hollow, as though he'd learned his emotions from a correspondence course in acting. There was nothing in him to fear, only to pity. He turned and walked away down Appleton Mews. From behind, I watched his body in motion, his sloppy gait, a random series of asynchronous lurches and lunges, the neurokinetic signals firing without order from his brain and giving no clear shape to his stride. Perhaps Marshal Xander's generosity to the ballet was his way of compensating for the physical beauty and coordination he lacked. He stopped at a new German convertible and got inside. The sleek, low-slung two-seater was completely incongruous with the man who owned it. It, too, must have been a kind of compensation for what he lacked in physical attributes. I was ready to bet that he'd had a horrible childhood with his peers picking on him mercilessly, and I wondered with some pity about the person who lived inside that vague, gelatinous body. Finally, as if to dispel all the unpleasantness that had transpired so far that morning, Rafik appeared under the arched entranceway to the Appleton. The misty air seemed to clear around him, but I'm sure I was imagining that. If anything, the air should have become murkier upon his arrival, since my doubts were waxing ever stronger about why he was there in the first place. I managed a worried little smile and wave, and he returned the gesture with a weighing look as he descended the steps and came to where I was standing with Big Red. Then I opened my arms to him, and he threw himself into them. We stood in the rainy air like that for some time, embracing and rocking each other's bodies, as though we were the star-crossed lovers in a British film from the 1940s. It was horrible, he said, tickling my chilly ear with his warm lips as he spoke. I replied, What were you doing up there? Max called me for help. When? I do not know what time. He was so weak, I almost did not recognize him. Rafik, did he say who attacked him? No. He said that he was hurt, and he has called the police, and pleads for me to come right now. For a wounded man, Max Hartley had certainly made a lot of phone calls. Why did he call Rafik? He pulled away from me. His eyes were fiery now. What are you thinking? He asked. I felt my face get hot, and I had to look away from his gaze. He shook me gently. Stenny, tell me what you are thinking. I kept my eyes lowered and said, What was Tony Di Natale doing here? The meekness in my voice was disgusting. Rafik didn't reply, so I looked into his eyes for an answer. I had a right to know, didn't I? Was she here already? I said, or did she come with you? I was trying to be direct and strong, yet I felt like a timid fawn in retreat, all because of the bewildering power of Rafik's warm body next to mine. Still he remained silent. It looks suspect, I said. You are suspecting everything I do. No, I said, but his words had an unhappy truth in them. Rafik turned and started walking away from me. Aren't you going to take the bike? I asked. It does not start, he said, and kept on walking. That explained why Big Red had spent the night on the sidewalk in front of Max Harkey's apartment building. I got up to Rafik and walked alongside him in silence. The cold, wet air seemed to enhance the discord. I had once again set off between us. At the head of Appleton Mews, he turned in the direction of his apartment. Can you make me a cup of coffee? I asked. He looked at me, his whole face sad and angry. At the same time, and his forehead appeared almost swollen, as though it could not contain the conflicting secrets that raged within. Yes, he said with a defeated sigh and a small shrug. He walked the wet sidewalks to his place without another word. Rafik kept a one-room apartment a few blocks from the ballet company. The old brick building sat in squalor, and Rafik's personal domain within its walls resembled the lair of an untamed animal. It was overrun with the intriguing detritus of a bachelor's artist, and was permeated with his wild exotic scents. The place was so small that the bathroom required a flawless Dior turn before you could close the door behind you. He kept it all clean enough, but it was hopelessly cluttered, and I sometimes wondered if Rafik wanted to live with me simply because I was the better housekeeper, which wasn't saying much. Once, inside, we shucked our jackets, and I sat on his bed. He began the ritual of preparing Turkish coffee in the minuscule galley kitchen, measuring first the cold water and then the powdery coffee into a long-handled brass pot called an ibrik. I knew that J.S. Bach had written a coffee cantata, but how could any music compare to Rafik's guileless improvisations at the stove? I was entranced by his natural grace, the supple moves of his arm and shoulder as he shifted the pot on and off the flame, the tilt of his head as he watched the brown elixir foam up and then subside from the rim of the pot, and the sway of his hips and body as he transferred his weight from one leg to the other, while Rafik transformed a household chore into a religious experience. I felt there was only one way to show him that I really cared for him, and I wanted him more than ever. I got up from my chair and went to where he stood at the tiny stove, his attention glued to the small pot from behind. I wrapped my arms around his slender waist and nestled myself against his strong back and his extra firm butt. His clean, masculine scent made me tremble slightly, with pleasure and desire, and with some uncertainty, too. "What?" he said while he continued with the coffee. "Maybe we don't need that now?" Through the starchy cotton of his shirt, I located his nipples and pulled but gently at them. Usually, there's a clear signal to him about what I want, but Rafik proceeded with the coffee preparation as though he was alone and content in his little room. My furtive hands wandered lower down his shirt buttons, along the front placket. I popped two of them open and plunged my hands into the curly hair on his chest. I grabbed little bunches and yanked gently, then a little harder, then took handfuls of his furry flesh and massaged it in small circular movements. Yet Rafik was intent on the art of Turkish coffee. My left hand was wandering down below his belt to the front of his slacks, where I discovered that a favorite part of him had already become stronger and was pressing insistently against the fabric. Mine was hard and moist too, but then it usually is when I am touching Rafik. "I love you," I murmured into his ears. "And I love you," he said. "So I will make coffee." "Let's lie down." "We must talk." "Huh? Hadn't I already said everything that was important?" "Rafik, just turn the coffee off." "No. You sit. I will bring coffee." "I don't want coffee now." He smiled slightly with that knowing smile that meant he was in control for the moment. He said, "But I do." That did it. My own love barometer deflated at once, and I went and sat down as he instructed me. I had an uncomfortable feeling that his refusal to have sex wasn't due to the usual choreographed exhaustion that had been plaguing him recently. Rafik's sturdy member never lied. He obviously liked the attention I was giving to him. No, his reason for not wanting to have sex with me that morning was just plain and simple rejection. And the next moment, unguarded, perhaps desperate, hoping to allay my worst fears, I asked, "Are you involved with Tony Di Natale?" He turned around from the stove and made a small, exasperated chuckle. "You are very silly, man," he said. "Then are you involved with what happened?" Suddenly he banged the ibrik sharply against the stovetop, spilling some of the coffee and making the gas flame sputter and flare into the small pot. "How can you think that?" he yelled. "The police are treating me with more respect than my lover does." "I'm sorry, Rafik." "No, you are not. You think only of yourself. You come here and then you want sex. You do not try to comfort me. You do not see what trouble I have." But I do. I do. All you do is accuse me. Only because I don't know the facts. You keep things from me, and so I think you're hiding stuff. I tell you all that is important for you. But I want to know everything. You ask for too much. Rafik, what are you hiding? He turned away from me and leaned against the stove. He stirred like that, motionless, until I realized that he was crying silently. I went to him again, held him close from behind, rocked him. I'm sorry, I said, and kissed the back of his neck. I'm a selfish ass. He mumbled his reply. I think you should go now. Are you putting me out? He turned to face me and nodded sadly. Please go. No coffee? He shook his head. I want to be alone. Great works, Danny. Your lover has just been through homicidal horrors, and instead of comforting him, you put him through another interrogation based on your pathetic notions of fidelity and unrequited love. Maybe I really didn't deserve a lover, if that was the best I could do in a crisis. Back when I was alone, I was a model of stability and understanding. Now in love, I was fretful and weak and dependent on the unconditional approval of my partner. No matter the circumstances, and worse, I imagined that anything he kept from me, a story, a phrase, a syllable, would later materialize as yet another reason for his leaving me. The intense attraction that initially bound us was unraveling, and no matter what I did to mention it, it only got worse. I offered to make him dinner that night, figuring we could face his unpleasantness more objectively after we'd both cooled down. He agreed. Then I left him with his Turkish coffee while I walked back to my apartment under an opaque gray sky. At some point in my gloomy stroll homeward, I felt an obscure and unexpected sense of hope, as though after tonight's cozy dinner, I'd be sure to make all his favorite food. Everything would turn out all right again. I would express my love to Rafik in a culinary way that would solve all the problems caused by misunderstanding and murder, just the way the sun always managed to burn through the darkest, most impenetrable clouds. And today I would win the lottery, too. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.